Okay, Benny, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, the first question, the most interesting thing, what is it that you see as unique, cool, interesting, and progressive about parakites in general?
I think it's two things. First, the speed, and the second is the ability of controlling your lift, controlling your glide. Yeah, that combination.
Okay, so the speed just allows you to fly the thing faster like a speed wing?
Yeah, it depends on the size, obviously. If you talk about parakites for speed flying, obviously they're very fast. But then if you talk about parakites for soaring, they're also fast. So they're faster than paragliders for soaring, and the speed parakites are faster than speed flying wings for um, classic speed flying wings. Yeah.
Okay, and then elaborate a little bit on being able to control your lift.
It basically is a glider that has a very long speed bar travel. You could put that on any glider, but a normal wing with a normal airfoil, it would just at some stage have too little angle of attack and essentially collapse. So that is part of the secret of a parakite. And the other secret is the risers, which, come from kite surfing. That's why they call them kite risers also. And that riser basically allows a very simple use of the whole range of the glider, the whole
Mhm.
speed range.
Just with your hands. Hands down, it flies
Exactly.
slow. Hands up, it goes full speed.
Totally. Yeah.
So help me understand what it is different about a parakite airfoil versus a normal paraglider.
So I think on a normal paraglider, the wing it's designed to have a very good glide ratio. So the stability is not the number one thing. I feel like on a paraglider they sacrifice stability over performance. The number one thing is glide ratio and the ability to go up. And on a parakite, the higher priority has stability and speed, and the performance is not actually that important. And also on a parakite, when you go hands up, you want that thing to go down. You don't want that just to go a little bit faster and ideally keep the glide like a paraglider. You want a parakite to really go down and dive. And so you can really have a bad glide ratio, but also a good glide ratio. And then a paraglider, we all dream about pushing the speed bar when keeping the same glide, right? And on a parakite, you want that other one.
Mm. So when you say stability in a parakite, you're referring to collapse stability.
Yes, obviously collapse stability, not roll stability. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're very dynamic roll.
Exactly. Yeah, you want some roll and you want that thing to dive in a turn. Yeah,
So
exactly.
what
But
is
you
it about
want
the
that
air?
thing to be solid.
Yeah, and what is it about the airfoil that makes it so collapse resistant?
Well, I'm not a designer. I'm just a test pilot and helping there a little bit. But it's basically known as reflex airfoil, and the reflex airfoil you can describe that basically if you have the line slack, then the recoil airflex would still produce lift and go up and make the lines tensioned again. And on a paraglider would only create lift if the B lines are kind of a little bit shorter than the A's and you give it an angle of attack by the lines, and then it makes lift. But the moment the lines go slack, the airfoil of a paraglider would go down and collapse on most paragliders. Now they use more and more reflex, especially in the high aspect ratio wings these days. So there might not even be that much of a difference anymore from some parakites to some paragliders, but that's just a feeling I have. I can't prove that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but it's that reflex basically that makes the parakites different.
Yeah, so it's when the lines are slack, that's where you can tell the difference between a paraglider and a parakite, or that's what a
Yeah,
reflex wing is
yeah,
supposed to do.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you can try this with any paraglider really. Ground handling, you stand on the ground and there's quite a steady breeze. You run a bit, you stop, and you let the wing shoot in front of you, and then you see what happens. If your hands up, you can't touch the brakes. So if your wing is going to float back and not collapse, then there's a chance there's some reflex in there. And if the wing shoots in front and it collapses right away, there's probably no reflex in there.
Yeah, and these are the videos that as Parakites came out, these are the videos that kind of went viral of people standing in soaring wind and grabbing the A risers of the Parakite and yanking them down only to see the Parakite shoot forward out front of the pilot and then just like kind of like mysteriously, almost like it was magic, the glider just like flies back up to line stretch and flies again without collapsing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you can do that with some paragliders actually nowadays. Yeah, you can do that with the Skywalk Mint, the Sage, the XOps 5, the BGD, Cure 3, the Diva, the Delta 5.
Lots of reflex.
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of gliders out there that almost, pretty much do the same. Yeah.
Okay, so do you think that reflex is not new because of parakites, right? Paramotor gliders
Not at all
had reflex long before parakites were a thing. Do you think that this is something that parakites technology is going to be trickling down into more and more paragliders?
I hope so. Yeah.
And why do you
to
hope
me,
that?
It looks... Well, who doesn't like a collapsed stable wing?
No kidding.
Who doesn't like to fly on bar and not have to worry about collapses?
Yeah.
I personally feel like I'd rather sacrifice a little bit of performance, but have a more stable glider and have to worry less about collapses. And so I hope that knowledge, is trickling down into the paragliders more and more. Yeah.
Okay, so the other question I have, when Parakites came out, I kind of was curious of whether or not these whole range of gliders were something that would be reserved for experienced pilots only, or if Parakites were actually accessible to students as well. What is your thought here?
For me, it's clearly accessible for students. But the ones we have on the market at the moment, none of them is kind of easy enough to like put a beginner on a mountain and send him down the mountain. I wouldn't do that. Maybe for Mustache 26, but other than that, you definitely need a little bit of ground handle. You need to control the roll. But for example, in Holland, in the Netherlands, they do teach complete beginners on the beach that have never touched a paraglider before, and they say they actually learn faster on the parakites than they do on the paragliders.
Yeah.
So I absolutely think that is totally possible. Back then at Flare, when we came out with the Mustache, we just didn't want people to get hurt, and we knew how easy that thing is to fly and how quickly you trust that thing and how intuitive it is. So for a good pilot, he goes on a parakite and he feels immediately at home, like he understands that thing like right away. So then it's very easy to become overconfident. So we try to warn people a little bit and kind of sell it as advanced, just to kind of prevent people from going a little bit too crazy for it,
Okay. Yeah,
that was kind of the approach we took.
Yeah, and I share the sentiment that my intuition now, having lots of experience on the parakites, is that I could probably teach someone to fly faster on a parakite at the beach than I could with a paraglider, just because there's so much less to do. You don't have to grab the A's when the glider falls down. Like it's just like, and catching the collapses is just so much easier on the ground. Everything is just kind of simplified on the parakites.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's like, you don't have to worry about this thing collapsing, and you don't worry so much about getting dragged. Yeah.
You don't worry about getting dragged, and you don't get blown back on parakites.
No. Parakites. Well, you can if you fuck up, if you pull, but as long as you let go, you don't.
I know, right? Yeah. And I have my Mullet X is a 20.5, and I'm just absolutely like flabbergasted every time I fly it at the speed range of the thing. Because I can pull the brakes down and I can soar with everybody on the full-size paragliders. The wind picks up, everybody has to land, and I'm still flying.
And you're still flying, and you don't feel like, hey, it's limits, right? You don't feel like, oh, this is sketchy. You feel like easy, could be more wind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really remarkable. Okay, so For people who are paracurious here, or who are getting their first parakites, what are some safety considerations that experienced paraglide pilot wouldn't have to worry about in a paraglider, but now that they come to a parakite, they now should consider?
Probably just getting overconfident. And then it's so easy to fly these things. It's easy to make a stubby touch on anything. It's easy to get caught in the grass with a stubby low. It's easy to get caught on the dunes. It's just that speed is your friend because you can convert it into lift. But the moment you hit something, the speed is not your friend anymore.
So people don't always recognize how easily they can build up so much power that could kill them with a small mistake.
Yeah, exactly. I think it obviously depends on the size. If you compare 13 Mustache to a 26, it's not fair. But the smaller you take it, the more wing load you have, the more speed you get. And
yeah, but even with a 26 meter parakite, the amount of energy that you can build quickly versus a 26 meter paraglider is remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct. Yeah, exactly.
And so people need to be, like you say, an experienced paraglide pilot can get on a parakite and in 5 minutes feel at home and feel, wow, I get it. Oh my God, speed, bar, and brakes all in one motion. It's all I need. But oftentimes these pilots are not used to the consequence that comes with the amount of speed and energy that they can build easily, comfortably, and consistently with a parakite.
Yes, exactly. And there might not be ready yet mentally to plan ahead enough, because they haven't flown so fast. So the faster you fly, the more you need to plan ahead, right? It's kind of like driving on the highway. The faster you go, the more you need to look ahead and not just in front of you. So yeah, just like anything, you want to, don't push the limits too quickly and like leave yourself a little bit time to grow into it and not get overconfident. But then
easy does it. Yeah, I had this at the dune a couple of weeks ago. I was at the dune and I was doing stabby touches faster and faster on the mullet, and then found that I could actually do a really steep dive downwind towards the dune, and I could actually stabby touch kind of like uphill, going like uphill and around the turn. And on one of them that I was really like optimizing for how close my body was to the sand, that I actually stabby touched so much of the glider that I just instantly hit the ground. Like I hit the sand because I had done a stabby touch that bent the wing back and it was like scooping sand on 5 cells. And so it really is easy to kind of find the limit. And of course, totally fine. Like I hit the sand and just, let my hands up and the glider just like picks me up off of the ground and I'm totally in the Venturi where you would get blown back on a paraglider. I'm just hands up and I'm flying, no problem.
Yeah. It's these sort of accidents, where it's getting overconfident, right? You can't blame the wing for it. It was your mistake.
Of course. So
that's what it is with parakites. Yeah, you can't blame the wing. It's the pilot.
Okay, while we're
normally in most cases,
right? Yeah, while we're on the subject of flying these things at the dune, I'm curious what your understanding of changing the brake length on parakites. Something that is really remarkable about parakites that's different from paragliders is essentially you could cut the brakes off of it, the brake lines off of it, and it would still fly pretty good because you have such control over the angle of attack that now the brake length is something that can change a lot and affects the flying of the glider a lot. So this is something that I was advised early on that, I could shorten the brakes on the Mullet X, and I found a huge change in the flying characteristics of the glider based on the brake length. So help me understand, what is it that changes when you change the brake length on a parakite, and how should people think of this?
I don't have too much experience with other parakites with the brake lengths, apart from the flare gliders.
Mhm.
And with the flare gliders, I can tell you that if you start to shorten them, the wings get collapsy. So because then you're actually applying brake while the wing is actually accelerated. It's kind of like pushing speed bar and pulling brakes. And then it doesn't take so much turbulence anymore. So you trade in a little bit of collapse stability.
And what do you
And the
get out of it?
flare,
If you trade collapse stability, what do you get out of it?
you get out of it you can slow it down better. You
Mhm.
can, the minimum speed decreases and you get more warning as you pull down. It gets harder. You get more warning before the wing stalls.
Yeah.
That's the main advantage. And on takeoff, if you fly it in the mountain with no wind, you get more lift also, and you better know where your hands should be for the max lift.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And what about responsiveness, especially for roll?
Yeah, they tend to get a little bit more responsive, especially when the outer brakes obviously are shorter than the inner ones. Yeah. Which, for example, on the U-turn is like that, that the wingtips really start getting pulled first, or also on the level wings parakite, it also like the brake geometry is quite set from the tips. So that, of course, when you shorten the brakes, it'll get more responsive as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But I really advise on all the flare wings not to shorten the brake lines because it really gets dangerous.
Okay, so on the Mustache and the line, you think that keeping the stock brake setting is very important so that you keep the collapse resistance from the reflex profile that the design is created with.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And because that
How is it with your Mullet X? Have you played around on your Mullet X with it?
I only flew it a number of times before I shortened the brakes.
Yeah.
And a couple of things that I noticed when I changed the brake setting was that I could do heli landings and I could spin the glider a lot easier. And the glider became a lot more obedient when I was kiting it.
With shorter brakes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was finding that at the dune, I was having a hard time setting the glider down without the leading edge coming over and going leading edge down, especially in light conditions. And so shortening the brakes made it more authoritative for me to stall the glider and to set it down, because a lot of times I was landing and I would pull the brakes down, but the glider would still kind of come over and roll over to the side and then go leading edge down, but because I'm pulling all the brake, but it still wasn't like really stalling the glider powerfully. So I also find that it's easier for me to get the sand out of the glider, kiting it upside down with more brake pulled.
Makes sense.
And also, I just find that it's more responsive, that it turns sharper when I pull on the brake. But I'm not sure I think I've shortened the lines by something like this, like a pretty good.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Pretty good chunk. But what you say about the collapse resistance makes sense to me, especially when you go in the higher speed range of your hands. Obviously, when I go full hands up, then the brakes are slack still, and I get that.
Exactly. Then it's the same.
Yeah.
Doesn't change.
My thought on this, Beni, is that as I fly with it, I have found a couple different ways to kind of have like a variable brake length in flight. So on the Mullet, it basically has a neoprene acro toggle, just like the ozone acro toggles used to be. And it has this little tab that the brake line's attached to. And I find that if I want to fly it most efficiently, then I just let that tab come out of the back of the brake handle and clear my hands. But if I want a little extra responsiveness, that I'll take my hand and I'll put it between that little tab and the brake toggle, and it basically pulls 2.5 centimeters extra of brake.
It's amazing how much difference that makes.
Right.
Yeah, you feel like 2.5 centimeters, not a lot, but it totally changes the way they fly.
It totally
Yeah.
changes the way they fly. And so I've also kind of played around with like almost like rolling the brake toggle so that I'm not pulling as much on the riser system as I am twisting the brake, just so that I get just brake travel.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's something here for this. There seems like there's some small innovation just in the way that the brakes connect to the glider, that in flight you can kind of change something, because there's moments I still tend to fly the Parakite with my gloves on at the dune, because there's so many instances where I actually need to grab the raw brake line itself and pull it so that I have the absolute authority over the glider, like you do with a paraglider. When you pull the brakes
I never
down,
do that.
you never do that.
No.
Yeah. This is just like, I am doing a lot of like kind of speed landing type things, like up the dune, downwind, and then just before I'm landing, I'm spinning the glider as hard as I can so that it lands, like when I land, that the leading edge is going into the wind.
Yeah.
And that's one of the maneuvers that I found that at the stock brake length, it was difficult for me to get the glider to spin as quickly as I wanted, so that I could land in a way that the glider was still, flying, inflating and not taking a small wingtip collapse. And I don't really know, like I have only flown the Mustache at the dune in a 22, and only for about a half an hour. But it was, I literally flew that Mustache at the dune for 30 minutes, and I immediately walked to the top of the dune to get cell phone reception. And I wrote Felipe, I said, I'll take one, like send it to me immediately. Right.
Yeah.
And so after that, in the mountains in Italy, I flew, an 18 Mustache, a 15 Mustache, and a 15-meter line with Gabe.
Yeah.
Just absolutely incredible. So I don't have a lot of experience like changing over between your glider and my glider. So I'm curious if I've heard so many people ask me, they're like, oh, you have a Mullet X. Oh, that's like the Mustache, right? I'm like, yeah, I think so. What do you think is the difference between the Mullet X and the Mustache?
I haven't flown a Mullet X a ton, to be honest. But to me, it felt like the Mullet X is really steep, really fast. But the performance is not that great. So you need quite a big surface to soar. So it needs a bit more wind to soar than a Mustache. But then on the other hand, it's probably as steep and as fast as a line is. So I would kind of place it a little bit between a line and a Mustache, the Mullet X, I think. Wow. Yeah. But I haven't done like, exact comparisons, Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. I think there's quite many different gliders out there, and they all have pros and cons. I feel like the paragliders, if you take any E and D two-liner or any E and C two-liners, they're kind of much more similar to each other than the Parakites are. I guess it's because they're new and there's no certification and they can do whatever they want, the brands. It's quite new, so I think there's quite big differences still.
That's awesome. A lot of personality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and some people like that better, and some people like that better. Yeah, and then often you have to get used to a wing as well. Yeah.
Okay, so another safety question regarding parakites that I have is that most non-paraglider wings, speed wings, namely, it is recommended that you fly it in mostly still air or smooth soaring conditions. And the Parakite is so collapse resistant that it might have jumped out of this category. So I have flown my Mullet X in very strong thermic, very windy conditions at my home site. Basically getting there before it's flyable for a paraglider. I say, I kite the Parakite up and fly it down the hill. And so I have my own experience around that, but I would love to hear from you what's the best way for people to think about the collapse resistance, and understand it so that they can fly it in a whole range of conditions while also staying safe and conservative on their conditions decisions.
Again, I think it depends really a lot which parakite you have, you know. I I think the one you have, the flow, I think they're all have a lot of reflex from kind of my feeling. But for example, the albatross, with aspect ratio 7, like you feel the turbulences a lot. I'm pretty sure that thing is not as solid as a Mullet X. So I'd be a lot more careful with an albatross than I was with a Mullet or with a Mullet X. You probably might not want to fly that albatross in the conditions you just did,
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with the Little Cloud one. The Little Cloud designer, he does not put collapse stability over everything else. So if you're on a La Mouette, I would also be a lot more conservative in which conditions you fly in. I think with the flare wings, they're also quite solid. Maybe not quite as solid as the Mullet. I'm not exactly sure. But any parakite can collapse, and the problem is if you do get a collapse, then things go fast. Especially when you have a lot of speed and you're with a high wing load, if you're on a paraglider, you kind of have time to react and do the same thing, the right thing, and counter steer, But if you do have a collapse on a parakite going 60, 70, 80 kilometers an hour with a high wing load, things go really, really fast. And they're made to fly close to the ground, right? So close to the ground, any collapse is one too much, in my opinion. And that's why I think for parakites, it's absolutely essential that these things don't collapse,
Yeah.
I don't think it's important when they do collapse. I don't think it's too important how the collapse behavior is of them. I think it's more important that they don't collapse at first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really prevention over cure here.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely.
As far as designing them and piloting them, you really want to prioritize flying in conditions that you can very confidently say, this is not going to collapse this glider. And as a designer, you say, okay, no, I'm going to prioritize collapse resistance over other things, because that's
my opinion.
Yeah, I like
that. There's others.
And I also find I have not taken a collapse flying the Mullet or the Mustache of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
I have taken collapses like kiting, top landing, these kinds of things, spinning the glider, and the collapses are very sticky, like they cravat. They cravat. And this is another thing that I found with shortening the brakes, was that without the brakes shortened, I was having an impossible time getting the cravats to come out at the beach, because the brake, it just pulls on the wing, but it just has no responsiveness. You really got to get that brake line and pull the brake line down so that it really produces a huge angle of attack, so it'll clear the tip. So help me understand what it is that makes these wingtips so sticky for collapses, and what is it about I know that you just said that we got to really prioritize for prevention over cure on collapses on these things, but talk to me about what you know about the collapse recovery behavior, cravats, this kind of emergency maneuver on these kinds of wings.
Love to tell you a lot about it, but I don't know. There hasn't been that many collapses recorded,
Yeah.
Like I've always thought, like, if a Mustache is going to collapse with a big cravat up there, I'll have a hard time clearing that cravat. And clearing is going to be hard, but also keep my heading, because you can only pull so much brake, and that before the the parakite would stall, right? So I think if you ever do have a cravat while flying, trying to solve the problem in the air while keep half the glider flying and try to solve it on the other side, I think it's going to be pretty difficult, like
I agree.
what we kind of deal with on E&Ds. It's going to be really sketchy here. But yeah, so far I haven't seen it happening, so that's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah.
But obviously on the beach they do happen, and yeah, same thing on a Mustache. It's tricky to get them open. I think the standard brake setting on the Mustache or on any flare wing is shorter than on the flow ones, so maybe that helps and makes it a bit easier.
Maybe.
And that's probably why you feel like, hey, I want that brake much shorter. I think on the flares they come already short. As short as safely possible. That's kind of how Flair sells them.
I'm curious. Have you done any stalls over water on the Mustache?
Yeah, I did some, but they're quite easy.
Right?
It's not a huge deal. Like it's kind of easy to make some dynamic stalls and then let it shoot again. It's super easy to keep it in deep stall. You don't have to do actually flying a tail glide is kind of difficult, and I think it only works if your brake is short enough. Otherwise you just stay in deep stall and it won't go backwards. But that's a cool thing to top land those deep stalls in a parakite. First, when we came out with them, we always pumped them down and we were like stoked. Oh, it's so cool to pump them. It's so easy, because if they go too far back, we just go hands up and we are sure they will fly again, and they wouldn't stay there and then let you down. So we did a lot of that pumping until we realized, hey, wait, we can just put our hands a bit further out, and then the wings would actually make a really nice deep stall and just kind of deep stall it a little bit off the ground, and then let it fly and flare. Have you played around with that?
Not really.
Hands out or in? Yeah,
I do that a lot on the Enzo and on the race gliders. I play with that, but I haven't really done it on the Parakite. What have you found?
Yeah, well, so on the Parakite, imagine you have the pulley line that goes to the pulleys, right? And it pulls the B and the C down, and then you have the brake line going straight up to the trailing edge. So if you pull your hands out there, then you pull B and C a lot, but you don't pull the trailing edge down.
Oh, wow.
So the further away from your body you have your hands, the more you pull B and C, but not necessarily the brakes. So on so
you let the tail gliders, stay up.
Exactly. You don't touch the tail. It's like having the brakes way too long. So on the flare gliders, if I have quite long arms, if I put them really far out and pull down, I manage to stall the wings without actually touching the tail.
Wow.
The trailing edge, yeah. And that makes deep stall. And obviously I don't want that on takeoff and landing because it's a very high stall speed. But for a top landing in strong wind, I don't mind. But that's why we recommend for no wind launches or no wind landings, especially on the small ones. Imagine you go down to a line 8 or 9. These guys, at the 8, I've measured the stall speed of the 8 is 46 kilometers with my weight, 74 kilograms.
Wow.
So you gotta somehow run that thing. And if you obviously try to land it without touching the trailing edge, it's going to be even faster. So you want to pull your hands down as close as possible to your body. So
to make the brakes work.
Yeah, exactly. So to have as much brake line pulled as possible. It's actually even better if your hands are in front. Like we call this, if I stand up on launch, normally on a speed wing, we do this torpedo up, you can see it. And then we'd still recommend to do that. But then as you're about to take off, once you have your speed, you bring your hands forward and you pull down here. And we call this the T-Rex launch,
interesting.
The dinosaurs. So because when you have your hands here in front, that's the position you pull the most brake line, basically.
Relative to the pulleys.
Exactly, relative to the second line, yeah. And the pulling down the trailing edge is what makes you that brake progression, what gives you the warning, hey, you're about to stall, it's getting hard there. But at the same time, it also gives you a lift when you pull down the trailing edge there.
Yes, I've noticed this. When I launched the line in Italy, I was just amazed at how fast I had to run and how weird
because
it
your hands were
was.
at the wrong spot.
Well, no, I also, but like I was very diligent about having my hands down like by the pulleys.
Uh-huh.
And that also felt so strange to be like running as fast as I could and pulling a lot of brake.
Yeah, it's kind of wrong.
It's kind of wrong. Yeah. So
Totally
very
wrong.
interesting.
Yeah, it took me 2 years to, to get that technique. So, yeah.
The T-Rex launch. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes quite a big difference. Once you get that speed, you bring in your hands and you push down the hands in front of you until you feel that hard point. And yeah, basically, the more you pull, the more lift you get. The quicker you're gonna take off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I saw a post that you made recently that was referring to some kind of modification that people are making to the line sets of the Mustache.
That was to the flare line.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's like
just
letting out on the bees.
No, not exactly. So all the parakites, they have this pulley system that gives you a certain ratio, right? So on a Mustache, the ratio from what you pull on the brake line to what actually arrives on the B lines is 1 to 6.
Uh-huh.
On the line, it's 1 to 5. Flow also uses different ratios. And they have the Pro riser for the Mullet X that doesn't have the lower pulley. So then it's a 1 to 4 ratio. So basically, with a 1 to 4 ratio, you need less travel for the same input.
Uh-huh.
And because the line has quite long inputs, if you're on a 15-meter line, your hands moving quite a lot. And because people like short brake travel, some guys started to modify it, and they basically modified the riser in a way that they have, instead of a 1 to 5 ratio, they have a 1 to 4 ratio. So the travel gets shorter. But the way this was modified, the designer Beni Kalin realized after someone had a bad collapse and got hurt real bad while soaring, it was in a unsafe way how this was done. Okay. You can modify them, but you have to do it in a different way.
Okay.
It gets a little complicated. That's too much for explaining this here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then the two last questions I have for you is, one is about, I guess it's related here. It's the safety of flying parakites relative to the trim, how important the trim is on a parakite, and also the stretch of the risers. Now we have a lot of aramid Dyneema, long Dyneema risers, and Dyneema is notoriously dimensionally unstable. So what is the implication of that? And then the other thing I want to ask you about is the technique of flapping to go up and not go down, because there's a very famous video of you launching off of what seems like a storm wall, some kind of staircase, and then flapping your way back across the street onto a building. Right? This is you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, start us here.
Yeah.
Start us here. Tell us about what this flapping is. Why does this work? It does seem to work that as you, on a paraglider, you pull the brakes down, you go down. And on a parakite, you pull the brakes and somehow you go up.
Honestly, I didn't know that this would help me getting some lift. This was the video you're talking about was right at the place where I grew up, and I've been windsurfing there and kite surfing for ages, and I've always wondered, like, hey, it should be possible to soar that buildings here, when the wind is kind of coming from the lake, which it doesn't do a lot. It's mostly offshore there. But so I've always wanted to try that, and I've tried that first on a paraglider, and then another day I took out that Mustache 15 in very strong winds, and somehow you've seen it. I wasn't allowed to go forward because I would have just went straight to the lake. So I wanted to start flying, but basically avoid going forward. And because the hotel was behind me, most of the lift I expected behind me. So I just did the pumping, the flapping, because it felt like the right thing to do, because I felt like, hey, I can get my minimum speed kind of down and avoid overshooting. And it's only later I've realized on the video that this is actually a helpful thing to go up. I wasn't aware of it. I just did that to prevent going forward, basically. Yeah. So kind of a funny story.
It is an
And I
amazing
think,
video, and it really does show kind of like what is so special about parakites, that in wind that you would never pull a paraglider up in, you can pull
no,
this thing out. And the flapping does seem to be my experience of it is that if I have any energy in the glider at all, pulling the brakes makes it go up. And if I have launched and I'm flying the Mullet, I can reliably pull the brakes and go up, and then let the hands up, and then as the glider comes over, pull again to catch it. And it's almost like a progress capture. Like I will go up and then I let it go, and then I catch myself, and I've like gained a couple of meters. Obviously, if I do that over and over, it stops working, and you stop going up and you start just pitching. But there is this ability to really like pull up, where on a paraglider it seems like you pull up and it turns into pitch, but there's really no way to catch the progress from it turning into some kind of dive once again. But on the Parakites, it seems like this is working just a little bit better.
yeah, it somehow does work. Yeah, I've tried it afterwards in some places, and it kind of helped me to go up. It's kind of exhausting, but yeah, if you're before you're about to land on the beach or wherever you're soaring, that's kind of something you can try to get some more lift.
I've noticed that the top landing on the Parakites is a bit tricky. It's very different, because as I come into top land, if I pull the brakes, I just go up again. And I actually noticed that I actually have to like kind of go hands up first, accelerate, get close to the ground, and then control my tangent, and then get my feet on the ground to slow the glider down, and then I can start kind of pulling on the brakes, and it slows me down altogether. But some very different techniques on the Parakites than the paragliders.
Yeah, exactly. So in some places, yeah, a lot of things is very similar, right?
Of course. And but I will say that
a few things are different.
And I will say that since having this Parakite, I've probably had it for a year. Since having this Parakite, it has changed my piloting. Like, it has made me...
In what way?
There's a couple of things that I notice. One is that I am more comfortable taking more energy into landing.
Yeah.
Like, even on my tandem, I find myself, like, on the tandem, I used to just like hold the brakes down and just come in on a nice straight landing. And now I'm like, oh, there's got to be some kind of surge that I let happen to like come in so that I have a really nice smooth landing. Also, like the speed landings that I do, like on my Zeolite, I noticed that I'm just a bit better at that. Like, I'm a bit more confident with that, because a lot of those things really take a lot of commitment to really make a hard bank, to turn downwind uphill, and to really commit to that line that you have to make a smooth landing on that. I feel like the Mullet has trained me on those kinds of things. And I just get so much repetition with stabby touches and stuff. And so I've learned a lot, actually, because I think, before I got the Parakite, I probably have, coming up on 3,000 flight hours or more than 3,000 flight hours. It's been a long 12 years of paragliding hard. And so I found that, the thing that was going to kill me on the Parakite was getting way more wingtip touching the ground than I wanted. And like how easy it is for the Mullet X's wingtip to like go into the bushes, the sage around here. I fly with a lot of sage, and it's like a couple of times, like not even trying, I just like look over and the wingtip is going whap bap, like coming through a bush, and I'm like, oh God. So it's definitely been a learning curve, but I think it's improved my piloting, being more confident, taking energy, and having just a better understanding of really like how the energy turns into lift, how it turns into length, how to land tangentially, like swooping that lake in Italy on the line, and like being able to drag my foot across the lake for 100 meters easily on my first try. Like, it's just it's just so mind-boggling. I was like, oh, I thought that was a pro move. No, it's pretty easy. You just go hands up, and it's enough energy to carry you across the water. So really, just mind-bending the difference. Do you think that there is room to make parakites that are more and more benign, more and more beginner friendly? Is it possible to make a total beginner parakite?
No, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's also
still
possible to push the performance more.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Flow has been doing that. They have quite a few Parakites already. They have the Albatrox, which has, I think, aspect ratio 6.8 or 7, even in size 13, which is pretty amazing. There's no other wing with such a high, aspect ratio.
Have you flown one?
Yeah. Not the 13 though. No, I'd like to try the 13 one day.
And what do you think
I've
about the
flown it.
Albatrox?
Yeah, I like the 16. Yeah, I was positively surprised. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it gave me a lot of feedback. So I can imagine for some pilots it's a little bit too chatty. But I liked it. Yeah, it had a good speed, really, really fast and responsive. It's nice. Yeah,
I have been considering selling my Mullet and getting an Albatrox, but the same thing that you said earlier of, oh, if you're flying the Mullet X in turbulent thermic conditions, then you probably need to like step back from that for the Albatrox. And I thought the same thing. I said, oh, there's no way it's as stable and as bomber as the Mullet.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. But
just the aspect ratio alone is just.
Yeah, exactly. We know from other wings, right?
Of course, I know. Yeah. This is not my first high aspect decision.
Yeah, exactly. It all comes with pros and cons.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Okay,
but high aspect ratio is fun for soaring,
Oh my God, I
absolutely,
wait.
we can't deny that.
I cannot wait.
I love soaring Enso or an ice peak in light winds. It's amazing. And so it was funny when I flew the Albatrox, I was kind of expecting a similar feeling, or also when I flew the Scrapper from Dune Riders, I was kind of thinking this is going to be like E&D wing with this amazing glide ratio. But I think there's still a huge step from those high aspect ratio parakites to the high aspect ratio paragliders, which makes sense because, as I said, the paragliders, they're made for performance. That's the whole thing, that absolute number one priority is performance. Everything else comes afterwards. And on the parakites, it's different, right? Yeah. It's user friendliness, stability first, and performance afterwards, which should always be that way, if you ask me. We shouldn't make parakites like a collapsey. That's the nice thing about the parakites, that
defeats the purpose.
Fast. Yeah, you can fly fast without having to worry about collapses. People, Holland especially, even those kite risers. And he puts them on Ensos and ice peaks and I love flying these things. And when people ask me how that is, I tell them it's like flying a Mustache with more glide ratio and the option for collapses.
Okay, this is you cut out there for a second. This is Evan Kruger that's making these.
Yeah, exactly. Evan Kruger from Infection. He makes those kite risers, those universal kite risers, and you can retrofit them on any paraglider, and that works. But you have to understand the cons of it. The pros is you just buy a set of kite risers, you buy an old Enso, and you've got your parakite. But it's obviously not as stable as a parakite.
Of course, it doesn't have the reflex.
It does have a little bit, maybe, but some CCC have no reflex. So you do fly a parakite with a good glide ratio, and you might be the first guy soaring there, and you can still soaring surprisingly strong wind, but it's not as solid as a parakite. And to me, the nice thing about those parakites is how stable they are, that you don't have to worry about those collapses. And I hope that's just going to get better in the future, and it's not going to be going the same way as the paragliders. The paragliders, they've also went from like a 7-cell parachute that you didn't have to worry about collapses. and stalls and anything, you had to worry about coming off the ground, right? 40 years ago with the first parachutes, paragliders, they have turned into these high aspect ratio performance aircraft where you have a much better glide, but there's a lot of cons, and one of is the simplicity and the collapsibility. And I hope with the Parakites we're not going too far that way, that they still stay very collapse stable.
So is the Albatrox is still a 3-liner?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see the possibility for gliders like the Mustache in that aspect ratio range to be 2-liners? Or is there something about the design here that, because I know that looking up at my Mullet X is like looking up at my Blackout Plus. The amount of lines and the thickness of the lines, I'm just like, wow, this thing is bomber. But when I look up at my XE Racer, everything is very thin. Everything is very spaced out. It's like there's not a lot of line there.
Yeah. I think the big advantage of 2-liners is that you are like straight connected to the glider. I can compare it with skis. You have a race ski with a race boot and you're like fully connected.
Yeah.
And a 3-liner to me is like a fat free ride ski with a very light touring boot, and the ski does a bit whatever it wants, and you're not really connected to it. But so if you take a 2-liner and then you add pulleys on it, you lose that.
Yeah.
That direct control, right? You still have the advantage of having a few lines less.
Yes.
But that doesn't matter so much in soaring,
Yeah.
Maybe it lets you soar in 0.5 kilometers less wind, but it's not fun anyway in so little wind. So what's the point, of making the whole glider more stiff, more expensive, just to save a couple of lines?
I like this. Okay, then let me get back to this other question, and this can be a brief one. How well do you think the Parakites are holding their trim, and how big is the range for the gliders to be out of trim and still safe to fly?
I think they get out of trim much quicker than any other wing.
Wow. Why?
Well, not the glider, but the risers, mostly the risers.
This is what I was talking about with the Dyneema risers.
Exactly. It's Dyneemas, and we mostly fly them on the beach, right? So there's sand, salt going in the risers.
Moisture all the time.
Exactly, yeah. That spray from the ocean and everything. And I have the impression that any line that is going through pulleys is much more affected than the other ones that are not going through the pulleys.
Because of the physical wear or the extra leverage on the line?
I have no idea. But if you think about paragliders, which line shrinks the most by far? It's the brake line. The brake line on a new paraglider, sometimes they shrink 5 cm in the first year. Why would it do that? Sometimes they're even just 2 meters long, just the bottom.
Wow.
I have the feeling it's the brake ring, the ceramic ring, or the pulley. But it's just a feeling. I don't know. Okay, so that. So 50% if the risers. The risers, they get out of trim pretty quickly. But then the other problem is that you're hanging, when you go hands up on a parakite, your weight is fully on the A's. The C's, you just kind of need them time to time for steering a little bit. And then the B's, when you do a hard turn and you pull, they might have some load. But mostly you're hanging on the A line, so that also contributes to it. Obviously, on a paraglider, the weight is spread out more even between the line groups. But here it's like everything on A, sometimes a little bit on B, hardly anything on C, and that also helps to get out of trim faster, obviously.
Okay, and is it possible to trim the risers on the Parakites, or do they just need to be replaced?
On the flare risers, it's pretty easy. I think on the Mullet as well.
Yeah, because they're all just Dyneema, finger traps.
Yeah, exactly. So what you can do, instead of doing like loops on the lines, you can actually do the loop on the riser, because the riser is also a line, right?
Yeah.
So you can trim all of the A lines together by making a double loop on the riser, or put a lark's head on the riser, for example. What you can check, there's an easy check that I think it works for almost any parakites. except the level wings one, for them it doesn't work, if I remember correctly. But normally all the parakites, so the way they are designed is the riser, the end of the risers, A, B, and C risers, in best glide position, they should be at the same level. So they should be all equal. So if you try to align A and C, and the B is, I think it gets shorter, or if the B is not aligned with A and C, then you can easily tell it's out of trim. That's kind of easy way to check your risers.
Okay, cool.
What's maybe they're left to say with the trim is that the way they get out of trim is they get slower. You lose the top speed, so the wings, they really don't dive as much anymore, and that's quite noticeable. If you compare the well-used Parakite with a new one, you really feel a difference. You don't have to be like a test pilot to notice a difference. It's very obvious. But so far, I haven't seen one that actually gets collapse unstable, that it gets collapsy. So they would rather become a little bit stally, because the ratio from the pulley line that affects B and C to the brake line, that gets different. So in other words, usually the brake line that is going up to the trailing edge becomes relatively too long, and that's why you get less warning before they stall. At least that's on the flare wings kind of true. Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess it's the same for others.
Wonderful. I want to ask you, while I have you here, there seems to be, mostly by my own anecdote supports this, but there seems to be an uptick in the injuries and fatalities in speed flying as a whole right now.
Could be. I'm not too much aware of this, but I've noticed that there is more interest in speed flying in general. So I used to do like one speed flying course a year, like and speed riding in winter. Speed riding I've always done, but I used to do like one speed flying course every year, and this year we've done 3, and they were all fully booked. So I think Parakites definitely inspire people to fly smaller gliders.
Yeah,
I think there's more people flying smaller gliders, and as probably more people doing speed flying, but I think it's not. Like, it's still a very niche sport, I don't think there's like thousands of speed flyers. I don't know, maybe there's 2,000, maybe there's 3,000 active speed flyers out there.
Yeah, but
not
the Parakites are also making things both accessible to intermediate level pilots, but also making we basically are coming full circle on our conversation, because we started with what is it that an experienced pilot would need to consider from his paraglider, now moving to a parakite. Progression for someone who's learning to fly parakites can be quite fast. They're very intuitive. They can be very comfortable. They can, keep the glider from collapsing almost always. So do you think that there's have you seen a trend of incoming parakite pilots needing to be slowed down, warned, mentored in a way of conservative decision making?
Oh, for sure, yeah, especially in speed flying. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's so much easier to fly proximity, to fly close to the ground with a parakite than it's ever been before. Before, you kind of had to work to get there, It was difficult to fly proximity, and it took a long time and experience. It's kind of like cross-country flying. You don't learn that at school. It's something like you have to work for years to eventually make your first 200K flight. And that's kind of how it was. And now it's a lot easier, which is fine. And in a way, it's a lot safer, because you can always escape much better as well. So there's better options to go out. You have glide, you have more speed, you can convert into lift. But pilots seem to be often not so aware of what happens when shit goes wrong. They just seem to not have enough respect. And I think it's a general thing we see in every sport. But in paragliding, if people don't have enough respect and go on a too difficult glider too quickly, you'll get some warnings, you'll get some collapses. The glider is going to let you know. And then you're either smart and, step down or fly in the right conditions until you get better, or you're not. And with speed flying, often you don't have much warnings, or people don't see it as warnings until something really bad happens. And you have a ton of speed, you have no protection, you're close to the ground, and then shit hurts. It's the pilot, it's not the wing.
Of course. But there is, the pilots and the wings are always in a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So the extra confidence of the parakites, I mean, I can imagine just in myself. I have tons of experience of shit going wrong, and I can just see it in myself that I was like, wow, this thing is confidence inspiring.
Yeah. I think what is really problematic combination for many pilots is a parakite, especially for speed flying, Instagram, social media, plus 360 cameras. It's very easy to make a video that looks good and makes your friends be like, holy fuck, that's you. I think that's just a dangerous combination for people that haven't gotten much attention so far in any things they've done, and all of a sudden they're fucking heroes. Yeah. And then they got sucked in and they want to be more hero and they do more shit.
Well, I hope that serves as a warning from a very experienced pilot to those who are coming in. So thanks so much. It's been wonderful talking to you. I appreciate your insight here on this.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.